John. The root of the word pragmatism is a Greek word meaning work. Pragmatism is a philosophy that encourages us to seek out the processes and do the things that works best to help us achieve desirable ends. Pragmatism examines traditional ways of thinking and doing and where possible incorporates them to everyday life. But it also supports creating new ideas to deal with the changing world in which people live. Pragmatism as a philosophy of education. The impact of pragmatism on American education has been considerable. Many schools have implemented pragmatist ideas in one way or another, but this influence is not always connected consciously with this philosophy. One reason is that pragmatism in its most influential period often identified as radical social reform, particularly to progressive education. Now, for some educators, this association was a detriment in getting pragmatist ideas basically accepted into conservative and traditional schools. They were more interested with the prag- with the practical use of pragmatist ideas rather than having those ideas identified as the philosophy. Therefore, the elements of pragmatism came into the back doors of the school, and this may be the factor that will help us explain why pragmatism has often been used and misused, but not always identified as the philosophy of pragmatism. Now, how can pragmatism be a philosophy of education? Pragmatism, as the dominant American philosophy, exerted a strong influence on the shape of education in the United States and affected educational ideas and practices in Europe and Japan. In the hands of Dewey, pragmatism evolved into a philosophy that so man is formed through interaction with his natural and social environment. According to Dewey, in my pedagogic creed, is that there are two fundamental sides of education, psychological and sociological. According to Dewey, psychological because people should not be a subordinate to another because he has his own instinct and power, which is the start of education. Sociological, Dewey viewed that uneducated person, as always in a social context, always also in a social context, neither the individual nor the society had any meaning without the other. And he also mentioned, I just like I mentioned a while ago, that he so man is formed through his social interaction with the environment. Pragmatism is a philosophy of education according to Charles Peirce. He derived human beliefs are originated through habits of action and truth-defined as inquiry, the correlation of meaning and action, where the meaning of an idea is to found in human experiences. According to William James, it is the totality of consciousness, experience permitted with thought, reality is ever in the making, growing where thinking beings are at work. The key word here, according to Charles Peirce, is habits of action in human experiences. According to William James, the key word here is experience, growing, and at work. Now, when we say pragmatism, that is more emphasis on what's work, what is functioning, and so forth. Like for example, when we are constructing the educational mission statement, putting that into practice, emphasizing more on the practicality rather than the book-centered approach, that should be the hands-on approach of education rather than the more on the theoretical approach of education. So that should be education for life, preparing students for life. According to pragmatists, this educational philosophy holds that the ideas are to be judged by their practical applications. The acquisition of skills and the possession of knowledge are not ends, but marks of growth and means of continuing. Education is understood as an activity or process That is the continuous reconstruction and growth of experience. They created the model of the educated person as the reflected man, one who was critical of the authority of custom and tradition as the determinant of belief and action, and who preferred the method of science of organized intelligence as the best way to solve his problem. Now, Dewey believed in scientific inquiry, scientific method, because according to him, that would involve exploration and experimentation. If there is experimentation and exploration, so therefore there will know the so-called experience. According to Dewey and the pragmatist, reality is determined by the individual's sense of experience. Man can know nothing beyond his experience. Experience determines knowledge. Knowledge and truth are constantly changing because phenomena are constantly changing. Values are derived from human condition. Ultimate values cannot exist, for truth is always relative and conditional. Now, let's move on with the aims of education. Dewey, the pragmatist, believed that education is a necessity of life. It renews people so that they could face the problem encountered through their interaction with his or her environment. Culture survives across time, Dewey pointed out, because education is the process by which a culture is transmitted across generations by the communications of habits, activities, thoughts, feelings from adult to the young. Without this, social life cannot survive, so therefore, education should not only be viewed merely as schooling of academic subject matter, but also education is a part of life itself. So students should be involved in real-life tasks and challenges. John Dewey believed that learning was active and that schooling is unnecessarily long and restrictive. John Dewey, according to John Dewey, children go to school to do things, live in the community for a real guided experiences, and to foster their capacity to contribute in the society. According to Dewey, aims of education first should grow out of the existing conditions because there is no permanent in this world except changes, so we should always adapt changes. Should be tentative at least in the beginning and maintain flexibility. It is said that the only one that survives are the one that are flexible. Must always be directed toward freeing of activities and end in view. So that's why Dewey said that the best approach in education is experimentation. And Dewey said that it is the people, he is referring to students, the parents, and the citizens who have the educational aims, not the process of education. As stated in Dewey's Democracy and in Education, the aim of education, so that's why stakeholders, the parents, are also included in are also one of the curriculum participants. As stated in Dewey's Democracy and in Education, the aim of education is growth. Since growth is the characteristics of life, education is all one with growing. It has no end beyond itself. So according to Dewey, the central aim of education is growth, since we can grow in ways to meet life challenges. So therefore, we should always grow out from the existing conditions. We should be flexible, for truth is always relative and conditional. According to Row 3, humans need to go beyond a quest for the meaning of life and seek meaning in their present day actual life circumstances. According to Sidney Hook, growth, democracy, and intelligence are the inclusive and related aims of education. Sidney Hook maintained that education for growth always goes together with education for a democratic society. According to William Hurd Kilpatrick, the overriding main concern of each individual is that to have the fullest and finest life possible. Because what has been accomplished and the possibility of future accomplishment is always uncertain. So therefore, continued progress demands intelligent effort. Education becomes involved in teaching children how to live, and the functions of education is to help people direct, control, and guide personal and social experiences toward a more democratic and enjoyable way of life. So, David the pragmatist argued that people should always be aware of the consequences of their actions so that they can guide their actions more intelligently. In this, whether that action is at personal level or societal or social level. In this way, people learn to direct and control their actions and requires less external support. According to Dewey, philosophy of education is not the application of ready-made ideas to every problem, but rather the formation of right mental and moral attitudes to use in attacking contemporary problems. When the fundamental changes occur in social life, people should reconstruct their thinking in their educational programs to meet these challenges. So, schools should foster habits of thought, So, thought, the function of thought is to serve as a guide of an action. That rightness and wrongness of an action is determined by its consequences, and that aesthetics is always relative. To time, people, and place. Invention, habits of invention, to have the experience and initiative to assist people in becoming all that they can be. Methods of education. Pragmatists prefer flexible education methods that can be used in various ways. Various methods are needed because there is no single way to educate. But we are reminded to be careful of the approach that we are going to use, or any resources that we will be using for the wider community. Pragmatists urge the teachers and students to see that all knowledge is related. Like, for example, reading, writing, spelling, they could be related. And developing a cross-disciplinary approach to the curriculum to understand how things are related. Activity-oriented approach, real-life situations. It teaches children how to solve a certain problem, encourages problem-solving ability in the practical setting. And then they could reconstruct past events and life situations to appreciate the difficulties involved in actual events and examines positive and negative effect. And then the experimentation, that according to David, it is the best approach for educating young minds. Now, pragmatists believe that this is the proper method of education: experiential, flexible, open-ended, oriented toward growth of the individual's capacity to think and to participate intelligently in social subject matter that we argued should consist of activities that enable the child to reflect upon his social experiences. For example, pragmatists feel that field trips, educational excursions, etc. are effective in teaching students about the world instead of audiovisual aids. Teaching methods focus on hands-on problem-solving, experimenting on projects, often having students work in groups. Curriculum should bring the disciplines together to focus on solving problems in an interdisciplinary way, rather than passing down organized bodies of knowledge to new learners. Pragmatists believe that learners should apply their knowledge to real situations through experimental inquiry. This prepares students for citizenship, daily living, and future careers. Role of the teacher in democracy and education. Dewey holds that the teacher's major role is to establish a proper learning environment in order to stimulate desired intellectual and emotional growth among students. So the environment should always be conducive to learning, and that will motivate the learners to learn. Teachers Teachers must understand that all children are not at the same point, however, and cannot be educated in the same way. So one of the roles of the teacher is to respect the individual differences of each learner and know the capabilities of each learner to guide them as they go along with the learning process.